We've arrived, folks. It's the final after show for season 1 of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. We're covering episodes 7 and 8, and so much happened in this episode. We have Jane Lynch in an amazing guest role. We have a divorce lawyer show up, but he might not be necessary because are Joel and Midge back on again? We'll go over all that and more just after this.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
I'm not the guy who cared about love, and I'm not the guy.
Man, what a voice.
Cared about
I know, I never really look at his face, and it's surprising.
You
ever looked at Old Blue Eyes?
Old Blue Eyes?
Yeah.
What, did you picture taller?
I pictured,
Beardier?
yeah, I guess more Italian.
Yeah,
He's very Italian, actually.
I know. But I'm like being stereotypical.
You're being stereotypical,
Yeah.
got
I hear you,
Yeah.
though. He's for such a good voice, he's pretty fair skinned. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or not.
He just gives me like very comfortable feelings because my grandmother was such a huge fan of him. So
Perfect song for the episodes.
yeah,
Don't you think your grandpa would have loved this show, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
probably.
Well, so let's talk about it. Of course, guys, this is the final after show for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. We're covering episode 7 and 8, the final 2 of season 1.
Final 2, and hopefully season 2 doesn't feel too long from here on
I
out.
know. There hasn't been that much news on when season 2 is dropping, but there's some that we'll be getting into in our news section. Of course, we're not just covering news about the show, we're covering the show itself, because that's what we do here at AfterBuzz TV. We cover television, and today on the show, we're talking about episodes 7 and 8. Before we get into our coverage, let's introduce ourselves. Guys, my name is Jeff. I'm thrilled to be here, and I've got 2 amazing co-hosts. Say hello, ladies.
Hi guys, I'm Briana Phipps. I'm so excited to talk about this episode and so sad that it's the last one to talk about.
I know.
I'm Steph Sabraw, and I feel the same way. It's like the first show in a while. I could talk about it all the time.
I know. It's funny. We've been going over our after shows, and there's still stuff that we feel like we're not talking about as much as we should. So let us know in the comments just how you're feeling about this show. Hopefully you're loving it as much as us. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about these episodes. The first episode we're talking about today is episode 7. It's called Put That on Your Plate. And it's written and directed by Dan Palladino. It seems like the workhorse.
That was a great Jane Lynch impersonation.
Thank you. Yeah, I can only see Sue Sylvester sometimes when I see Jane Lynch, so it's nice.
Yeah.
It's the downside to playing such an iconic character is it can be hard to get out of that. But I thought Jane Lynch did an amazing job getting out of that character. That being said, let's talk about our overall thoughts for episode 7 of Mrs. Maisel.
I liked this episode because it did give us that variety of women in comedy and like what is expected of them. Her kind of meeting someone that's a successful woman in comedy for the first time. It was also interesting, I think, to see comedy being held in a stage arena kind of setting instead of a bar or a cabaret.
Yeah.
I love this was a heavily comedy background episode. You got to see Midge forming her comedy and a great intro to the episode 7. And just seeing how people perceive women, people perceive female comics, and how female comics perceive other female comics or women in the workplace with them.
It's a great point. Yeah, I loved this Jane Lynch performance. I was a little nervous at first because it seemed like kind of this broad, kind of maybe overwritten version of a female comic, but then that ended up being the point. So I was like so relieved when I saw that some of this acting was intentional, was a choice by Jane Lynch and the direction. Let's start by talking about her. I think this is the most important part of this episode to me, is this character, Sophie Lennon, played by Jane Lynch. To catch you guys up, basically, Susie is taking Midge to see one of the big, maybe like Amy Schumer famous level comics of her time, Sophie Lennon, who's sort of a blend between a stand-up comic and a one-woman show kind of act. She sort of plays this overworked, grumpy lady who's...
She has that catchphrase.
Yeah, put that on your plate. Yeah, she's like from Queens, and she talks about what it's like to be a frumpy, kind of ugly female in Queens. How did you guys feel about the first time we see Sophie Lennon on stage?
I didn't know what to think because I didn't know what to think also about the whole setup with the agent. He seemed kind of ruthless, so I didn't know how his client would be.
Right.
And then when I saw her, it was this mix of comedy, and it's also just the most interesting part of the show is bringing just the era comedy into it. So I didn't know. I was confused, but a good confused. I wanted to know more.
Yeah, I enjoyed Jane Lynch in this part, and I think that she played it very well. Trying to think of how this is. I found it hard though because I automatically knew she was wearing a fat suit.
Yeah.
Because her head was so much smaller, and so I know that that's a little bit later. But when we get to that point of that, I'm like, did no one else really know that this was a fat suit?
I know. This is an example of how this show can be more subtle than I think it might seem, because I don't think we were told. It was well directed by Dan Palladino, because I don't know if it was supposed to be obvious that she was a great stand-up or maybe a hacky stand-up, and the audience was laughing, but I as an audience member, I sort of felt like this doesn't seem like the comic that Midge wants to be. So how am I supposed to receive this? And
Yeah, it would be interesting seeing Midge open for her, because they don't translate into each other very well.
So
Definitely.
their fans would be completely different. Yeah, it was almost like her own show, like a type of late night talk show comedy version.
Yeah, I think she's a great example of sort of the transitional moment we're in with comedy, where there is the broad character-driven comedy, the Sophie Lennons of the world, you could say, but the comedy that this show's interested in exploring is the personal narrative-driven observational comedy that Midge is a genius at.
And we see her do in the beginning of this episode when she gets back in her stride.
Yeah, I totally forgot. I do want to talk about that montage. We're going to jump back into Sophie Lennon, but I'd be remiss not to mention it. This montage was so amazing.
So good.
When she's crafting her jokes, and I was like, this is what the part of the show that I'm just in love with.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love watching and just seeing the like 3 different stages of 3 different shows and how the joke kind of develops over
3
time
different
and for
jokes
different
too.
and for different audiences.
Yeah.
And then it was interesting because my roommate kind of walked in while I was watching it, thinking I was watching a sitcom. I'm like, oh, what sitcom are you watching? I'm like, I'm not. I'm watching Marvelous Miss Maisel. And they were like, oh, it sounds like what's the laugh track? I'm like, that's just people laughing at your jokes.
Human beings laughing. Can you imagine that?
And it's just it is subtle, like you say, but it's also really detailed. And the little things that she changed each time, it was different. Sometimes she would erase words, sometimes she would add words, and sometimes she would change the whole setup of it. So I've been saying this the whole time. I love to see just the discipline in the actual career of comedy.
And even just taking something as simple as watching your parents pull their twin beds apart.
yeah.
And going as far as to create this whole joke about ghosts.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this was so good. I don't know if I've seen a better representation of the craft of stand-up than this 3 minutes at the beginning of this show. As a show that's claiming to be a love letter to stand-up comedy, what a beautiful manifestation of that goal.
True.
It's so good. This was, one of my... I have this note here, I have in bold, this show has the best cold opens I've ever seen. You know, like the 2 minutes before you get your title screen, I'm always immediately sucked into the show. And like, I just so good.
Yeah, because we haven't seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it was so important too, because then right after you get that scene with Susie telling her how good she is, she's like, you know how long it takes people to get a tight 10? Which I'd never heard that term before, so I had to go look it up.
Right.
But yeah, like it just, we've said it all through all of these episodes, but it's just, this comes so naturally to her that she can be this green, already have her top, like her tight 10 in, which means like basically there's no point where she kind of falls off of it. It's straight through. And then even so much to make Susie cry, which was such a good scene for me. I loved watching that dynamic, especially having the dynamic of her crying before and Susie being uncomfortable and just Susie being like, what is this?
Yeah.
What are these things coming out of my
Face is wet. Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the gifted sort of genius of Midge, because it normally takes comics years to excel at the rate that she is. And I read a really interesting article on NPR, actually, that was just making an argument that one of the best things about this show was just watching a genius discover their genius. There's a lot of ways to watch this show, but he was talking about he's a scientist, he's a professor, and he'll see students that just have something intangible, and that's genius, right? And as goofy and sometimes confused or whatever Mrs. Maisel can be, she's truly a genius stand-up comic.
Yeah, and there's a total difference between when shows kind of are lazy and go around it and just want to be like, oh, we went from step A to step B, but it's like she worked hard and naturally is gifted. And it reminds me the tight 10 part. I didn't know it before, but I was reading a book called Born Standing Up, and it's about Steve Martin's stand-up career, and it took him years to get 10 minutes of
and he's noted as one of like the best comics of our generation,
Right.
or not our generation, but of
All time. Yeah. So loving this, loving all of this. Let's jump back to the Sophie Lennon stuff. It's interesting, Sophie and Midge meet, and again, this is when I started to see, I think, maybe the facade of Sophie Lennon. When she's meeting Midge, I was like, something's not right. I think part of that owes to what a specifically performed version of this character Jane Lynch brought us, where I think even her performance shows us some of the cracks in Sophie Lennon's facade.
Well, I think even going off of what Steph said about seeing the manager and seeing kind of his personality and thinking of that about her, I think when we met her and she was so nice that you kind of already knew that something was wrong.
Something's fishy.
Like this can't go this well.
So let's talk about meeting the real Sophie. We go to her house. It's a mansion. She has all these butlers. How did you guys react when all of a sudden this was the show we were in?
This got to a new level because I haven't seen a woman portrayed like this really ever, like in her manner, like owning stuff with men working for her, serving her, and just the detail of her character, like the Macron, just being such a jerk.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the Sophie we expected to see all along. So I wasn't like 100% surprised when this is what happened, but it was interesting seeing, it's not like Midge has not grown up in a lavish lifestyle. So, she's not poor by any means.
No, they're really well off.
She may not be as rich as Sophie, but I think it might owe to the little thing that I don't know where Sophie was before this, because we don't know her life, but she kind of reminds me of someone that maybe grew up not well off and got money, and this is how she thinks she's supposed to act, whereas Midge is someone who's just always had what she's had and just is herself a little bit more.
What I loved about this was even the shade of complication. Obviously, she's still a servant to women's issue. Like, she still has to play ball in the way that society wants her to play ball. But in some ways, she's quietly pushing back. Like, she's never seen her kitchen. So it's this very complicated version of femininity where even though she is a boss who isn't necessarily a cooking housewife, she still has to subscribe to the standards of what that society wants her to be.
She still can't eat food.
Right.
She still has to put on a character of this very unput together person because that's what society expects from her. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can't talk. And she still has to have this air of, oh, look, I'm just a weak little woman kind of thing.
Yeah, she is so boxed into a really bad space. I mean, she's the epitome of letting the outside comedy world affect you. Like if Midge wanted to let all those hecklers that said you can't be pretty in comedy or make fun of her because of the way she looks, she wouldn't be. You can't be Midge or you can't be the best like that. And to the point of Midge using a pseudonym, I think this is the beginning where her head starts spinning like, how can I ever be anything close to what I want to be if I'm not being my full self?
Yeah, I mean, it's like almost sad in the portrayal of when you now when you look back on Sophie Lennon's stand-up part and you see why it felt weird to you.
Yeah.
It's because she's not being herself. She's being this character. She's not being true. And that just speaks also to the greatness of Midge because Midge can just be herself and still get laughs.
Such a smart way to explore these issues on the show. I can't credit these writers enough. This was just really interesting stuff. And it's that thing where you see Midge trying to figure out who she is amidst all of this. Because on one hand, Sophie Lennon is the most powerful female comic working. She has this huge house and she does have men working for her. But she hasn't broken the boundaries of what female comedy really can be. And I'm just going to go ahead and talk about it now because it's the crux of the episode. That seed gets planted in Midge. She's frustrated with who Sophie kind of ends up being in real life. And being Midge Maisel, she has to talk about it on stage. So Harry's there with Susie ready to see Midge's tight 10. And the floodgates open and Midge goes off on the truth of who Sophie Lennon is. This was shocking for me. Did you guys see this coming?
I did not. Like, I feel like I should have seen it coming, but I did not see it coming. And it was one of those, I think I've used before in another part of the show, but it was that office kind of feel where you just feel so awkward standing there and you just want her to stop because like, I loved what she was saying, right? But I just know that guy sitting in the crowd, I know she's just ruining her career as she's starting doing this.
Yeah, it was like this very climactic moment of where you're like, yeah, say it, say your truth. And she noticed, which was great on her part as a comedian that everyone knew her punchlines. So she wanted to change, which was awesome, but I did not think she was going to go full-fledged name dropping and all the details with it.
Yeah, as a viewer, I was like so mixed because I was like, man, this is some of her best stuff. Like, she's killing. I love what she's saying, but like, oh God, don't. You're going to ruin your life. Oh man, it was such a perfect... The best television makes you feel 5 things at once. Quickly, I know you're covering Barry right now.
Yeah.
Check out, if you're a fan of comedy, check out the season finale of Barry. That was amazing. I just have to shout that show out real quick. But it's the same thing where when your stomach is twisting with every kind of emotion that you could be seeing at the same time, that's how I felt during this set.
Totally. And you don't really know how you walk away from it because I have to really think about if I like to stand up because the thing that stuck with me was my uncomfortability and worry for her.
I know.
I also just felt so bad for Susie in this moment because, like, after everything, so like they're all down at the bottom. She finally gets her back on her stride. They're friends again. They're doing well. She has 30 business cards or whatever, and then crash, bang, boom.
Yeah, crash, bang, boom. It was, and
That's all I can say.
I know. I'm like, that's actually a great way to put it. So Harry, I kind of thought maybe it would be like, okay, like maybe Harry won't be that mad, but Harry was pretty pissed.
Pride's a funny thing.
Well, and you know what? She probably destroyed Sophie Lennon's career. And I think we don't necessarily see all of the fallout from this. I wouldn't be surprised if season 2, we'll get into specific predictions, but I have to wonder, are we done with Sophie Lennon or might we see some kind of pushback, legal pushback in season 2?
Well, it is an interesting commentary that by gaining success for herself or trying to gain success for herself, she puts down another woman.
Good point.
Yeah, I felt kind of mixed feelings about it because it's almost like Midge is so much better than her in every way. Like, Sophie's living a really sad life, honestly. Right. But she does have to share her truth, but I know it's like
Sophie's kind of doing for the time period what she had to do to, in her mind, to be successful. And it kind of, there is that little bit of sadness of, okay, like we have to destroy this person, even though she is one of the only female comedians going right now.
Yeah, and it's tough. This is a thing that's common with comedians, I think, but like Midge didn't necessarily realize, for her, she was just doing more stand-up and making observations about societal standards. Like, she wasn't necessarily going after Sophie. She was going after the bullshit fact that Sophie can't eat a macaroon because she's a woman. But the consequence is that really she's going after Sophie. And you see this with a lot of amazing comics. Every single great stand-up comic has a stain on their career where they accidentally tip too far into truth. I think like Kathy Griffin is obviously a comic who I think is great, but sometimes pushes the line too far.
Yeah, there's a very thin line, you're right, between being funny and being relevant to hurting other people.
Yeah, this is really interesting, and I'm glad the show went for it. The show didn't hold back, and I loved it.
I'm also glad that they went for it in the repercussions of it, because they very easily could have been like, you know what, we're having her do well. Let's have like maybe he gets mad, but she just takes off after this, which I'm glad they didn't have that happen.
There is no TV, there's no social media, so that could have very well happened.
Right. We will talk all about those repercussions in just a minute, but before we do, guys, I want to tell you about an amazing podcast. You're listening to a podcast right now. Let me tell you about another one. This is Conversations with Maria Menounos. She is our very, very gifted and talented AfterBuzz TV founder who has her own show. And if you want to have fun, learn, and grow in all areas of your life, I would highly recommend this show. It's hosted by Maria and drops every Friday. It features celebrity and influencer interviews and gives you tips on all aspects of life, whether that be finances, career, relationships, and even comedy. Maria, even being the beautiful, gifted E-host she is also, I think, a funny Boston comedian at heart, and you get to see some of that side of her on her show, which is awesome.
I think you said that she did some stand-up that she told you about.
Yeah, when another host, Tehran from AfterBuzz, came on, she was talking about how she had a short-lived stand-up career. I would love to see.
It doesn't surprise me. I think for someone who, she has so many sides to her, and I love seeing sort of the scrappy Boston Maria that sometimes shows up on the show.
Oh, yeah.
Reminds me of Midge, honestly.
Yeah. She's has those different aspects. You're like, whoa, okay, yes.
Yeah. So you guys should definitely check out that show. Again, it drops every Friday. If you like the show, I'd encourage you to hop on iTunes and let Maria know it was the Mrs. Maisel panel that sent you there. And you should check that out. There's a lot of crossover with the themes of this show and the themes of Maria's podcast. So that's Conversations with Maria Menounos, podcast edition. Find it on iTunes. Okay, so Midge's comedy career wasn't the only thing that this episode covered. We're also looking at some of the domestic issues of Midge's life, including this divorce lawyer. So Abe gets his promotion. He's bringing home a colleague. The family assumes he's going to be this kind of senior citizen. They prepare all this soft food.
No teeth.
But instead we get this hunky divorce lawyer. I really thought that Abe was setting Midge up with a man.
Totally.
So I love the twist when we find out it's actually even worse. And S-word hits the fan.
I just wrote down the character's name, David Rosenthal.
David Rosenthal, the divorce lawyer. Thank you, Bree. How did you guys feel about sort of this family farce episode of moment of this episode?
I loved it.
I mean, I loved it as a viewer, but as like if I were Midge, I would be so upset. Like, just tell me what you're gonna do. Don't go. It's like a blind. Like when you go to hang out with your friends and randomly another person shows up to be your date. That's how I felt about the situation. It's like, we're gonna all sit down for dinner. Oh, by the way, happened to bring along this divorce lawyer here.
Yeah. This is an example of, I think this show does a good job of portraying the flaws and intelligence of women, but I also think it shows the intelligence and flaws of men. I don't want to gender stereotype, but this feels like a mistake only a man would make, you know? Like, I'm going to fix it.
I mean, in that sense, yeah, but
Yeah.
I disagree that only a man would make it. I feel like there are some women that would completely make this mistake, just in a different kind of way.
A different kind of way.
But I loved the scene that we get with her and her mom being kind of on the same side but still fighting each other.
Yeah.
Where I feel like this really shows us how alike her and her mom are. Like we've seen aspects of it from the measuring to how they go to sleep at night. But I think this scene really drove home that they're very much the same person, just Midge is more outspoken than her mother is.
It's almost like Midge got to live the life that Rose might have wanted. At some point during the show, I don't remember exactly when, but we learned that Rose back then was a Parisian smoker who lived this kind of salon glamorous life. And I think
I believe that's in the next episode.
In episode 8. Yeah, so it does show you that I love when shows explore this of two women who think they're so different, but really they're the same. They're a mother-daughter, and
I mean, that's why you have such conflict with it, because you realize your own flaws in somebody else.
right. We get these sweet moments where Midge is trying on Rose's clothes, and they want to talk about the truth of what is really there, but they're afraid to. So the bummer is Rose does learn about Midge's personal life through Abe.
That she turned down Joel when he came back.
And it's not good.
I love that it led up to this because if you notice every episode, Rose gets a little bit more upset and actually in denial and depressed of what's happening. And she gets a little bit more dramatic each time. And we see it keep leading up until episode 8. So him not her finding that out I was waiting for that. Because you know when women know that something's being hidden and then they find out and they're like,
Well, I felt like this was the tipping point for Rose, because for all the secrets and lies that Midge has held from her, now her husband is as well, and she just feels like everyone's against her. And I think I was so happy that we got to this point for her characterly. Can't even speak today, because of the church scene that we'll talk about later. Like, I was so for Rose just letting off steam.
Let's talk about it. This scene in Temple. Amazing.
yeah.
How did you guys feel?
I loved it
Yeah.
because it is, I think, to any religious area, like I'm a Catholic, so in the church, people are super, super quiet, judgmental, also like they put the priest or the rabbi on this pedestal where no one can touch them or talk to them and think that anything that you do causes them pain or whatever. So seeing families trying to be quiet and talk to each other and you see them in the kitchen doing the same thing, it never works. Everyone's listening to you. Everyone's going to hear what you're saying. And I just felt like it was relatable.
I just loved seeing Rose get to that point, because she's always this put together, pristine, well-respected woman, and for her to do something that's unacceptable in society and life and just go to that point where she needed, because she never let it out. She never would let anything out. She kept everything in, and that's what happens when you keep everything in for so long. Eventually it erupts, usually in a very inappropriate time.
This is what I love. I'm so glad you brought that up, Bree, because we saw this happen to Midge in episode 1. When she's been repressing her life the whole time, she gets drunk, gets on stage, and learns she's a stand-up. What a cool full circle moment that Rose gets her chance to do the exact same thing in this episode. Really, I mean, it's the same theme of how different are Rose and Midge at the end of the day. the eloquent anger with which Rose expressed her frustration showed that she's also maybe could have had a stand-up career too, you know? Loved every minute of this. Or at least a career. Yeah, that's a great point.
She's really funny.
So funny. Maren Hinkle, I mean, sorry, there's not a bad performance in this show.
No.
Like, it's so good. This scene was awesome. I love that it happened in Temple, and it just shows some of the, again, family farce of this show is working. It's very Palladino. Palladinian. Is that what we would say? I don't have too much more to actually cover in this episode. I think we've covered most of it, and I want to make sure we talk about this amazing finale. Do you guys have anything else before we move on to the final episode?
The only thing I just want to quickly point out is that Joel's now living with his parents, and we get that flashback of his bar mitzvah where his dad, like, really... I think it kind of... I just want to talk about it for Joel's character development because I think it kind of shows how he's always felt inadequate because his dad's kind of reinforced that in his head, that their family's coming up and he's taking his money, and he feels like it's his job, I think, to really escalate his family status
and
because
also
of his dad.
Focusing on not good things to I feel like he amounts his success and his family's greatness by things that you shouldn't be, like very superficial. So, I mean, I do give Joel Ben credit for that because it's probably a lot of him questioning what is right, what is wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I do believe it's this episode where we see Joel really start to excel at work, or at least the seeds planted of that.
Yeah, he goes to work and like... No, I think that's next episode.
It is next episode?
I think it's after he sleeps.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
starting, though.
You're starting to see him kind of, This is the episode, I believe, where he goes to Abe and says, I'm going to have
can do it.
everything for the money, everything. I won't be in their lives, but they'll be set up.
Yeah, these two episodes changed my mind a bit about Joel and create this interesting question for season 2. That being said, I say we move on to talk about episode 8. Yeah. We do want to ask you guys, though. So we chose to cover this streaming show 2 episodes per after show. So you guys have followed. If you're here at this point, you've probably listened to our other after shows. We want to learn from you. How do you want to hear about these streaming shows? Obviously, when these shows come out, you binge them. We've talked about doing one long 2-hour after show. We've talked about covering them individually. There's so many ways for us to cover streaming, and it's interesting as the industry of television changes so rapidly, we want to make sure we're accommodating your needs as an audience. So let us know. You can let us know in the comments below. You can hop on our website and send us information there, but your feedback is important to us. So we would love to know how you feel we should be covering streaming shows that drop all at once. All feedback is welcome. Let's talk about the season finale.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you and good night. Written and directed by Miss Amy Sherman-Palladino herself. I loved this episode. What did you guys think?
Yeah, this was a great episode because we came full circle. We started off with this breakup, and now we're ending this with a question mark. And I love that we got to a point where one person in her life now knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
I love that it's full circle. I love that you see progression, but also there's still a lot of cracks that are coming.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to start right away by talking about Joel and Midge because this is a very important episode for them. They hook up in Midge's childhood bedroom. I was surprised, and there's some build-up where they're hanging out on this carousel and they're both kind of drinking. And
she brings up the divorce.
And I love how human all of this was. I think for a show that's been kind of broad and slapsticky and in a great way, these 20 minutes of Joel and Midge figuring out where the hell they're at as a couple, I found to be very moving and very compelling.
Well, and I think it's so nice, too, to see on TV a couple that has gone through some tough times, but are never, like, super mean to each other.
They love each other.
There's still that love there, and I think right now we see a lot of just hate on TV with couples, especially with these breakups, especially with reality TV. So it was nice seeing just like, I'm not happy with you right now, but I'm not going to also just be rude to you for no reason.
So true.
And Joel was never malicious. He made a lot of bad decisions, but he never did anything to hurt anyone, which is his redeeming quality.
Yeah.
At least not intentionally.
Yeah, he doesn't mean he's not an idiot, but he didn't purposefully do that, I don't think.
I particularly liked this thing where Midge is kind of binge eating and stress eating. And
she spoke to me on such levels with my mac and cheese.
It did look so good. And I've had Brie's mac and cheese before, and guys, let me tell you, Brie knows how to make mac and cheese. Mac and Brie's.
It's arguably one of my favorite dishes in the world.
Oh my god, I'm gonna have to
Get on that train. Well, so let's talk about ultimately Midge and Joel they have this connection, things are rekindling, and they end up in her childhood bed. And stuff happens, and I want to quickly talk about the amazing scene where Midge tells him that for the 5 years they were married and hooking up, she would undo 2 of her bra clasps so that he could more easily transition into the next step. What a great encapsulation of both of their characters.
I loved everything about this scene and this next scene in the morning for that exact reason.
Yeah.
For him realizing how much she actually did to make his life easier or to make him not notice things. Like even when he sees the red marks on her back and she's like, oh, they go away by morning just in time to put it back on. And he's like, I've never noticed them. Yeah, I used to powder them.
Yeah.
And then like waking up in the morning even to him be like, do you always look like this?
I know. Sex on TV, I have sometimes mixed feelings about sex on TV because we live in an era now where there's so much sex on television, which is fine, but I think if you're gonna show us a sex scene, there has to be a narrative reason. There has to be character reasons behind it rather than just seeing 2 people having sex. And this was a great example of showing like the bra conversation and the powder conversation and the power dynamics of a couple. That's why this was written into this scene. It was way more
it
than
wasn't
just
just for
sex.
the sake of sex.
Yeah.
Exactly. It showed us so much about the 2 of them, and we got to see this really kind of sweet intimacy between a couple that had married for 5 years.
I think this is like one of the first times we actually see them in this happy way together where you can be like, this is why they're a couple. This is why it worked.
And we had the kind of a callback it alluded to just even her and her mom's nightly performance where they go to sleep, wait for them to go to sleep, then put the tape on their eyebrows, all this, put their hair back, and then
put on the night cream.
do it right before they get back up. So it's just all of this dynamic of the relationship and a relationship at that time in a really interesting way.
So at this moment in the show, well, first, quickly, there's a hilarious scene where Midge has to kick Joel out. If you want to talk about what it's like to feel like a teenager in
and
your
has
parents'
to
house.
sneakily get his wallet out of the kitchen without anyone noticing.
Yeah, it was amazing. But I want to talk about something even bigger, which is at this moment, were you guys shipping Midge and Joel?
This was the first moment where I could see a future for them in some aspect.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say I was shipping them because I think that he has a long way to go before they would be ready to get back together if that ever happened.
Yeah.
No. Was not shipping them. I'm like, okay, she needed to get some sexual action in, and I think it's good for them to kind of see each other in more closer settings where they get to understand each other in not like perfection in a set marriage, but she's moved on. She's really becoming the coolest woman ever, essentially.
I was kind of here for it, to be honest. Maybe that's just
I think that I'm
Joel's
just like,
side.
yeah, I think we're just hopeless romantics, Jeff.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. We just always want to see love work out in the end.
I want to talk about the one line here that was so powerful, though, was when Joel says, "You're just a lot, Midge." And I feel like it was ambiguous. Does he mean you're too much for me as a man? I don't know, like, because you could read it as like someone with that big of a personality is so appealing.
I think it was him trying to speak to his insecurities without actually saying I'm insecure. It was him trying to say, you're so perfect, you do everything so well that I felt inadequate in comparison and that I couldn't deserve you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Midge professionally because we're dealing with the fallout of this huge mistake she made in episode 7, which was outing Sophie Lennon's real personality. We get to see Susie and Midge pounding back drinks. This was kind of fun. But ultimately, we learned that she's been blackballed. And a lot of this episode is Susie and Midge trying to figure out how they can rebuild Midge's career professionally. I do want to talk about something specifically with this, though, and that's the moment when Susie learns about Midge and Joel. This was a very powerful scene, I thought. It's happening in the cabaret with all the women preparing for their set, but I love the way it was handled, that, like, as 2 friends, Midge had to tell Susie where she was at, and I thought Susie's reaction was very honest. What did you guys think here?
I don't know if you want to go first, because I feel like we're going to have very different takes on this. So.
I feel like it was great. Susie's everything that Midge needs, and she needs to be able to hear her side of things because Midge is kind of, I don't know. I really I like everything Susie does. I feel like she's so good with Midge.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was important for Susie to say her piece, especially if Midge invited that in, telling her what was going on. But I also understand that they have a history together that Susie is not aware of. All Susie knows of Joel is this bad stuff.
Yeah.
So she never saw them before. She never got to see the good times with them and the good parts of Joel or hear the good things about Joel.
Right.
So it is, and it's cliche and it's hypocritical, but when you're going through things like this and you're kind of like wondering if you should let someone back in your life, everybody has an opinion, and it's kind of like you only want to hear what you want to hear. So I think that she just wanted to hear someone say like, that's fine. So while I think it's important for Susie to say her piece, I also think that she doesn't need to beat it over the head. She's like, this is what I think, take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about Susie's love life. I feel like the show hasn't let us in too much. And I've sometimes sensed that maybe Susie leans toward, maybe she plays for another team. I don't know if you guys have gotten that at all.
I think that they've obviously set it up with physicalness of that.
Right.
The cliche stereotype of what a butch lesbian would look like.
Right.
Yeah, I love the dynamic, and I'll talk about the clothing of this whole season anyways, but I do love, I think that I don't know about her sexuality, but in terms of gender roles, she definitely breaks all of those, and just
Maybe
clothing.
asexual.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just...
But I would love to see more of just Susie in general. I think we do get good character development with what we have, but seeing that would be really interesting.
Well, we haven't gotten a backstory with Susie yet. We've seen flashbacks of other people, but not her, and I think maybe we'll get into predictions.
Yeah, it would be nice to see more of her. Alex Borstein was talking about her choices as an actress, and she was talking about how her and Amy talked about wanting to play Susie as if she was in love with Midge. Not necessarily in a physical, sexual way, but as in someone who's in love with her genius.
Yeah.
And I think that
comes across.
It comes across. Yeah, it's such a good performance. Well, we need to move along, but I want to talk about this final scene. Susie gets the very good idea as a manager to get Lenny Bruce involved. What a great full circle way to bring him back in. And I do want to say Jack Kirby's really good as Lenny Bruce. I love this character.
Everything about this scene.
Yeah, so she gets the idea to allow Midge, to allow Lenny to actually open for Midge at the Gaslight. At this point, Joel had already heard Midge's stand-up. Let's quickly talk about that.
Comic store.
The record. I love the way this was handled.
I said the comic store.
It feels like it. It's the early version of what a comic store would be.
Stores.
Yeah, I thought the way for Joel to learn that Midge was doing stand-up that way was so powerful.
It was so sad in a way though, because he's so excited. He's like, I'm gonna go listen to these records she listens to. Everything I do from here on out's for Midge. I'm gonna get back. I'm gonna make her proud of me. And then the first thing he hears is just her basically, I'm gonna swear because I know they swear on the show.
Do it.
So basically shitting on.
Yep.
Do it.
Yeah.
I obviously it always hurts so 10 times worse when you hear something not from the source. But it was such a good way to bring, because I love the record store. I think it's a great way to have a callback in that setting. And then also just, this is what you deserve. You're not on a record because you're not a good comedian,
I
Joel.
know.
It's in that other episode with Noah being in it, that's kind of what he says. He's like, I never got why Joel was a comedian. You're the funny one.
You're the funny one. Yeah. Oh man, so good. And the show really lets us explore that dynamic because Midge gets introduced by Lenny Bruce and gets on stage, and she doesn't have her name introduced, which is important. We'll talk about it. But she has this amazing dynamite set all about Joel, and he's in the audience watching.
Well, and I know we didn't talk about the Penny scene because it was going to lead up to this.
Right.
But I'm going to use that as a time to go off on Penny. Like, how dare you? How dare you come into her work and yell at her for sleeping with her husband when you were having an affair with the man, and she never did that to you in public.
Believe it.
That really sealed the deal on Penny.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Bye,
done.
Penny.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
But how did you guys feel watching Joel watch this set?
I loved it. I feel like it showed every insecurity that Joel has possessed this entire season, magnified because he's hearing it, he's seeing it, and she's undeniable. Everyone can say that. This is her at her absolute peak of the episode. I mean, her outfit is exactly what I feel like she wants to portray to the world. And the whole set was true to herself, which is what she wanted. And that's the biggest slap in the face you could ever get as an ex.
Yeah.
I loved more so than him watching her his dynamic with Susie after watching her.
Yeah.
Just him going in and blaming Susie for destroying their marriage. based off of this set, and her saying, "You did that. You destroyed your marriage.
Yeah.
That's not on me, and you would be lucky to be with this woman."
Yeah, the other thing we get to see here is not only Midge killing it, but dealing with hecklers. So she deals with a sexist heckler who says, "Women aren't funny. I'm going to swear because it's from the show. You're a bitch." And then she handles it so well, where she's like, not all men are taken, ladies. Like, she's just so on it.
I think it was such a good scene and so important to have, one, because that stereotype is still alive today where people still believe women aren't funny. And I know personally people that think that they can't be. And two, just showing how to handle hecklers, right?
Yep.
Because she could have just gone off on him and been angry with him, but what would that have solved? Nothing would have happened, but doing it the way she did it, sure, it may have pissed him off more, but everybody else was more so on her side at that point.
They were cracking up. I mean, the best hecklers, or the best way to deal with hecklers, is to make more comedy out of it. And it just shows she really is a genius. We get to see that moment. Of course, this is what is so complicated. And the last 2 minutes of this episode, we're watching Joel process all of this all at the same time. On one hand, he's watching these hecklers call his ex-wife a bitch, and so he's gonna handle that. So he follows this heckler outside, clocks her in the face, and starts crying and says, "She's good. She's really, really good."
Yeah.
And in those words, "she's really good," we see him loving that she's amazing, hurting that she's amazing. It's
Jealousy.
everything. Yeah.
There was jealousy, there was anger, there was sadness, there was him being proud. It was perfect. And the actor, what was his?
Michael Zegan.
Michael
Yeah,
Zegan?
he is good.
Yeah.
100%. Like, he made me believe every last bit that Joel is in this inner turmoil of not knowing what to do at this point because he loves and hates her all at the same time.
Oof, yeah, amazing scene. And then the episode's clipping along. We go back into the gaslight. We see Midge on stage. We zoom in. She says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mrs. Maisel. Thank you and good night."
So perfect.
I've got chills, y'all. I've got chills.
With her Audrey Hepburn do-up,
I know.
oh my God, it was perfect.
I'm glad you brought up the clothes, because clothes are never something I would ever notice on a television show. But, I actually noticed the clothes in this show.
Well,
They're
with the-
so good.
I've
With a
been-
time
Pinterest
period
every
piece,
outfit.
Yeah.
with a time period piece, it's so important to be on top of it. That's part of what I love about that time era, and part of what I hate about that time era.
Yeah.
Is I think that the clothes look so amazing, but I know me, and I'm like, I would not want to take the time to do all of that in the morning. But there is something to be said about putting yourself together every morning and making sure you look good before you leave the house. Whereas today we roll out of bed in pajamas and leave the house in pajamas with our hair not even brushed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally hate the force aspect of it. But if you want to just talk about just fashion and women using that can use that to their power, this show did it so well. Every outfit she wore was so freaking cute. And I love clothes.
Yeah.
So I was had to pause and be like, hey, okay, I got that.
It does feel like the last clip, the last freeze frame of her on stage in that black dress, "I'm Mrs. Maisel, thank you and good night." That's her. I want a poster of that to hang in my room. This is the perfect springboard for season 2.
Yeah, that really set you up for being so excited for what's to come.
Speaking of being excited for what's to come, we will get into predictions in just a minute, but before we do that, I want to do one more stand-up spotlight, guys. We've been comparing Mrs. Maisel to Joan Rivers all season, and I have a clip of Joan Rivers on stage. When you see this, I think you'll really see some of the similarities. So Phil, bring us in. On Carol Burnett, just so you guys know. Such iconic women.
This is a lovely show to be on, Carol. It's so nice to be here. She's such a nice hostess, and I had a terrible time getting here, so I'm twice as happy to be here, because New York, I don't know if you know, but it's pouring rain, lousy weather, and we flew in to, get here, and we're going out to the airport, and you know how there's going to be trouble from the very beginning? We're driving out to the airport, and I look out of the taxi window, and flying along right above our heads is an albatross. Whistling going my way. So we get to the airport, and no one's flying. American isn't going, Eastern isn't going, United isn't going. My airplane, Trans Jersey, is going. So I'm a little nervous, and I said to them, "How come you're flying?" And they said to me, "Don't worry, there is nothing to worry about." And they give me a rabbit's foot and a cross. Because I was going tourist. Everybody in first class got their own priest. It was the most amazing thing. And, yes! And they take us out to look at the plane, and even the plane looks parade, and it's standing there, yes, parked in front of its hangar with its wings folded over its nose.
I think that's good for now. I honestly could watch this all day. I know.
Wow, I'm so glad you picked that clip.
Don't you just get Midge vibes from her?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I didn't even get, like, I haven't done enough justice to women in comedy back then because I just assumed there wasn't many.
I mean, it's funny. Joan Rivers has lived so many lives, R.I.P. Joan, but this shows her first one, which was as this amazing conversational stand-up
Yeah, I
comic.
think nowadays people always look at her as like fashion police and forget that that's where she got her start.
Right. And when you look at her hair and you look at, she is beautifully put
Yeah.
together. You know, she's the comic who did love to wear cute dresses. And, you know, I just think, like, it is clear that there's definitely some Midge vibes going on here.
I know we're short in time, but I just do want to, it was one of my favorite parts of the episode, so I just want to touch really fast.
Please, yeah.
On when Midge and Abe are having the conversation. You had alluded to it earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Where she tells him, we may get back together. And he gets so upset about it because he's like, you've ruined everyone's life by this. And now you're going to go back to him. But at the end of it, that little monologue he gives about his wife and how she was different. And like both of them have changed, but he still loves her. And
Yeah.
that in marriage, change means love. Like you love through the change.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That was important. And anything else we missed, I know we're kind of rushing this coverage, guys, but let us know in the comments. We will continue the conversation with you. So we love this show. And I think with that, we might as well get into some predictions for season 2.
And now, your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
Let's try to keep it fairly quick. I wasn't sure if I wanted Joel around as much as he probably could be for season 2, but because of Michael Zegan's complicated performance, I'm excited to see what happens with Joel and Midge next season. I think that's still going to be the question of who do I get with. I do think we might get another love interest for Midge, which will create jealousy between the two, and I'm excited to see Midge continue to kill it at stand-up.
Yeah, I want to see just Susie and Midge continuing to develop her career. Obviously hit more issues because she's going to be moving different platforms, which we kind of saw, and it didn't work this time. So it will be interesting to see her on different shows and things.
In lieu of my predictions, because we did have some, like, not spoiler, but like some things that they have let out about season 2. I'm going to go ahead and read those for like a little bit of a news / prediction thing.
Yes.
So we know that they already have started shooting the show, started in March, and Midge is still the star of the show, which, duh. Joel's future is said to be uncertain on the show, but they don't know if that's the showrunners just trying to keep things on the down low, but it may be that he's not as involved moving forward. There will be some pushback when it comes to Mrs. Maisel, the comedian, as, you know, from outside of her family and stuff, but also maybe inside of her family, because we know we might see her parents kind of find out about this life, which I would be so excited for.
Yep.
Midge and Susie are going to go on the road. They're going to stop in, they know for sure, in the Catskills and Borscht Belt, where everyone from Joan Rivers to Buddy Hackett frequented. Lauren Graham has been pitching ideas to the Palladinos to appear on season 2. This writer wrote a little funny thing that said it would be great if she made a cameo as a friendly innkeeper named Lorelei who meets Midgie and Susie on their tour and takes them to a small Connecticut town.
I love it.
But yeah, so Lauren wants to be a part of the show, and I'm sure she will be if she wants to be.
Right.
That'd be so awesome.
And then there's, of course, more hopes for more seasons because of the Golden Globes acceptance speech and also with the claim it's getting.
I have a feeling this show has a long life ahead of it. Bree, where did you find that coverage, just in case our fans want to jump on that as well?
It was on, one second, let me pull it back up.
Perfect. I will say, connected to that, I want to read something I also loved about this show. This came from Vulture. I just think it'll be a nice way to sort of wrap out today because I think it really gets at the essence of this show. So this is a great piece on Vulture that I wrote. It was kind of an interview / profile of Amy Sherman-Palladino. It talks a lot about her and her husband, how they work. It talks about her office, her obsession with Minnie Mouse. It's really, really interesting. But here's the takeaway I loved. Mrs. Maisel, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Jane the Virgin, and the work of Ryan Murphy, Shonda Rhimes, and Genji Cohan express their ambitions by riffing on TV's less respected genres, such as musicals, soap operas, women's pictures, women's television, telenovela, and dance. If those shows seem slight at first, that's because we're skeptical that anything so escapist and female could also be substantive. But that's these shows' magic, to be challenging and delighting instead of supposing the two have to be in conflict. I love that. Mrs. Maisel isn't a jaunty New York fairy tale smuggling in a more subversive tale about an indefatigable woman trying to smash her way into a boys' club. It's both of those at once. Isn't that a cool way to describe the show?
That is.
And I did look it up. It was Cosmopolitan is where you can find that article.
Great. So that's from Cosmopolitan. This was from Vulture. Oh, I could talk about this show all day, but I think we've got to wrap out, guys. Well, the good news is season 2 is coming up. We can't wait to cover it. I've had so much fun covering the show with you guys.
No, I can't wait for season 2.
I know, it can't get here soon enough.
I know. Well, if people are as obsessed with this show as we are, where's the best place to connect with you guys online?
Instagram and Twitter at Steph Sabraw.
You guys can find me at BRI_Phipps, PHIPPS on Twitter and Instagram.
You guys can find me on Twitter at Jeffrey C. Graham, and please reach out. I could talk about the show all day, as you guys can see. In the meantime, though, guys, if this is your first time kind of discovering AfterBuzz TV, we're a TV coverage network, and we cover everything. So we encourage you guys to dive into our archives and check out some of our other coverage. Just like this little quote described, we cover everything. We cover soaps, drama, reality, dance, everything. So check that out on AfterBuzzTV.com. And guys, we'll be here for season 2, but in the meantime, have an amazing time with television, and we'll see you then.
Marvelous time.
Marvelous, yes. Bye.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Keven Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Thank you, and good night.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.